you would, please pull out your bulletin. You should find a sermon outline this morning to follow along. We're going to be talking out of a message called Lay It All Aside. And so if you would, just pull that sermon outline. You can follow along this morning. How many of y'all are ever guilty of worrying a time or two in your life? Anybody ever worried about something? I think anybody who denies that they've worried is basically denying their humanity. We all do it. It's happened at times. We do it about different things that come up in our lives. And I have a couple things I wanted to share with you about worry as we get started. One of the things is a little passage I wanted to share with you. It says this. It says, worry is fear's extravagance. It extracts interest on trouble before it comes due. It constantly drains the energy God gives us to face daily problems and to fulfill our many responsibilities. It is therefore a sinful waste. A woman who had lived long enough to have learned some important truths about life remarked, I've had a lot of trouble, most of which never happened. Any of y'all can relate to that? She had worried about many things that had never occurred and had come to see the total futility of her anxieties. I had another story I wanted to share with you about an Austrian town under attack from Napoleon's army. Listen to how the story goes. The beginning of anxiety is the end of faith, and the beginning of true faith is the end of anxiety. George Muller Massena, one of Napoleon's generals, suddenly appeared with 18,000 soldiers before an Austrian town which had no means of defending itself. The town council met, certain that capitulation was the only answer. The old dean of the church reminded the council that it was Easter and begged them to hold services as usual and to leave the trouble in God's hands. They followed his advice. The dean went to the church and rang the bells to announce the service. The French soldiers heard the church bells ring and concluded that the Austrian army had come to rescue the town. They broke camp, and before the bells had ceased ringing, vanished. So I thought that was a pretty neat story about a church that wasn't sure. They were under siege. They weren't sure, should we even meet? We got this trouble going on. Trouble's brewing. And sure enough, they decided since it was Easter, they were going to have the service anyway. And by ringing the bells, the other army thought that the rescue army had come to defend them. Charles Swindoll says this about worry. He puts it succinctly. Worry pulls tomorrow's cloud over today's sunshine. How many of y'all have ever pulled tomorrow's cloud over today's sunshine? A Swedish proverb says, worry often gives a small thing a big shadow. How many of y'all have ever allowed a small thing to have a big shadow in your life? Look what Jesus says in Luke chapter 12, verses 22 through 24 about the passage is titled, Do Not Worry. It says this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable you are than birds. Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? How many of y'all ever added time to your life through worry? Verse 26, since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. That is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire. How much more will He clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek His kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In particular today, we're going to focus on this whole idea of laying it all aside and not worrying. Listen to these statistics about worry. And I don't know if it's an exact statistic, but looking at it, it seems to be generally true. At least it has been in my own life. Listen to this. 40%. This gives a percentage breakdown of the things we worry about in life. 40% of the things we worry about are things that will never happen. Any of y'all ever done that? You worried about stuff? 40% of the stuff in your life you worried about is stuff that never happened. 30% is things about the past that can't be changed. How many of y'all have maybe had remorse over a decision? Wish you could go back and do something differently? I know that, I think it's a Kenny Chesney song, says I'd done a lot of things different. You know that song? Any of y'all ever heard that song before? He talks about certain things he would go back and do differently. So 40% of the things that would never happen. 30% things of the past that we can't change. 12% about things about criticism by others, mostly untrue. So somebody's criticized you or said something negative about your life, causes you 12% of the worry in your life. 10% is about health, which gets worse with stress. So it kind of makes a little bit of a joke about the fact that 10% of your worry is about health, but worrying about it actually makes you more likely to have health problems. 8% is about real problems that will be faced. So the main ones are criticism, health, and real problems that will be faced. And that makes up about 30% of the things we worry about according to this statistic and some of the other stuff. I know in my life, I can be honest in saying that I have wasted a lot of time on worry, particularly on stuff. Number one, it's usually you worry because you have no control over it. I mean, that's usually where worry starts stemming from. But I want to go through a couple points that I think will be helpful this morning. Number one is we need to get to the root of the problem. I know about a couple who had a home, and maybe some of you have had something like this happen. So they had a nice, beautiful home, and one night they woke up to find some swarms of these tiny insects flying through their house. Anybody ever woken up to a type of situation like that? Well, it turns out they woke up in the middle of the night and they had some termites in their house. And what happened is they were wise. They realized, if I open the front door to the porch, turn on the light, turn all the other indoor lights out, guess what? The termites will fly out of the house, which I thought was pretty smart. So just a little tip, if you ever have something like this happen, turn all the lights in your house off, open the front door, turn on the porch light, and it'll help them kind of find their way out. But what was interesting about this particular story is here they were, they had thousands of these insects in their home, and they had no clue until that night. They had absolutely no clue, because I've never done an in-depth study on termites, but as you know, termites tend to work within inside the walls, where you can't see. You go into a beautiful home, a beautiful building like we're in right now, you can't really tell what's behind these painted walls. Everything looks nice on the exterior, right? But what happens with termites is they start to work within the foundation, and they start to eat away at a home and start to destroy the foundation, and can cause a considerable amount of damage if not discovered early on. And that's the same thing that worry can do in our lives. It can happen in my life where everything looks fine on the outside, but what happens is on the inside it starts tearing away and eating at us on the inside if we're not careful. I mean, there's all sorts of things we can worry about. What is the worry you've been dealing with? Maybe it's having enough money to retire. Like you have conversations with God. Am I going to be okay? What about my children? What about my family? Are they going to be provided for if I'm not there to take care of them? Being a father of one young child, soon to be a second young child. These are things you think about. You start worrying. I start having worries that I didn't have prior to having children. You worry about finances. Am I going to be able to provide a good living for my children? Are we going to have nice things to give them and take care of them? And these things can be a worry. And I want to share with you, just being transparent, something that I struggle with worry about. And it's something that you look at it, and I look at it now, I'm like, that was just kind of silly to worry about these things. And when God was doing a work in my life, calling me into ministry, He showed me some things. I had a time of prayer, and I was in college, and I really believe God gave me a vision of where He was taking me in life and where He wanted me to go in the ministry. And it's been it was one of those times where you ever been around another Christian before when they're kind of like, well, God said this to me and God spoke to me. It's almost like they're hearing the voice of God every 10 minutes. You know what I'm talking about? Well, maybe it's true for some people, but that's not how God has worked in my life. I can say there's probably been a small, maybe on one hand, the times over the last 15 or so years where I truly believe I heard the voice of God. And one of these times happened when I was in college, and I believe He gave me a vision about what He wanted to do in my life. And what's crazy about this here is God, if He really was working in my life, showing me what He wanted me to do with my life. But what happened is the years that followed, I started worrying about that coming to fruition. I started worrying about trying to force it to happen in my own power. Anybody can relate to this before? Maybe you had a dream or something you knew God wanted to do in your life, and you felt you had to kind of make it happen in your own means. And what happened in my life is I spent a several-year period of time where I was just worried a lot about this. And I started worrying about something good that God wanted to do in my life. And maybe you've ever worried in your life. I remember doing like a devotional one time where I talked about that we need to get rid of the stepping stone mentality and how we're hardwired. At least as a young guy, you're hardwired. Like every job you take is a stepping stone to something better, right? Everything you're doing, it's just a stepping stone. You're just taking this step. You're getting here eventually, but you're taking these steps. And one of the things that happened is I realized I wasn't honoring God because I wasn't being totally in the present moment where I was, because what I was doing is, like this stat I read, is 40% I was worrying. Most of my worries about things were never going to happen, or things that, I just needed to rest and let rest into the hands of God. And maybe you've been worried about something totally different. I think everybody in here carries a worry of some sort. You may not talk about it. It may not be something that you've shared with others, but everybody has a worry of some sort that they're carrying around in their lives. And one of the things that God had to do a work in my life is He had to teach me to learn to be content in the present, to enjoy the season I was at. And there's a scripture in Ecclesiastes, it's not in your notes, it's Ecclesiastes 2 verse 24. And this is King Solomon writing, and it said that he wrote this when he was older. So here he was, this king of Israel. He had all this money and wealth and fame and all the things that a person could pursue in life. And this is what he says later on in life. It says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. And essentially what he was saying is he spent all his life pursuing all these endeavors. And at the end of the day, he's realizing, I didn't fully enjoy the present season, the present journey I was at in life. And I think about these things a lot, especially being a parent, right? Just enjoying that stage of life they're at. Because I think about these things, I'll be sitting there, either like on my phone or just wasting time. And here I do have this little daughter. And I'll be honest, I do these things happen, right? This is real. Like these are mistakes I made. And here I am like either watching TV or watching something that's just, just passing the time. And then sometimes I'll have to look over and see my little daughter playing by herself. And I'm like, one of these days I'm going to miss this. This little girl's going to be out of the house. She's going to be grown up. And here I was spending all my energy in the wrong direction, and I wasn't enjoying that present moment and that time that I'm never going to be able to get back one day. And my wife's in here listening. She's going to hold me to this later on. But it's true. I do these things. These things happen, and I do misplace my priorities at times. And I want to go through a couple other things that we tend to worry about. Point number B I put is money. Anybody else ever worried about money in some capacity? We're in what we call the daycare stage of life, where you're having new expenses of daycare that you didn't have before. And the good news is my wife's a teacher, and so which means she can stay home with our children in the summer, and which means you get a little bit of a reprieve from daycare expenses. And so we're kind of going into that reprieve stage, and it's kind of nice. You kind of feel rich. You're like, whoa, I'm kind of rich now. I got this excess money now. This is kind of nice here. And one of the things I realized, I've been worrying about money a lot less. But how many of y'all know that strain of life where expenditures come up can wear and tear on your heart and your mind to the point where you're not enjoying where you need to be in life, and you're not enjoying the job God has given you because you feel like it's not paying you enough, and you feel like you deserve better. And maybe you do, and maybe you need to keep pursuing those endeavors. But God wants you to get to a point where you're resting in Him and trusting in Him. Point number C I put is politics. Now, I'll be honest, I do my best, and I've done a pretty darn good job of staying out of political issues. But one of the things I do see is people worry about politics, what's going on in the political sphere lately. And how many of y'all see, like in the news, you'll see like certain issues cycle through. One of them will be like 2 weeks. It'll be like the hot button issue, whatever it may be. I don't even want to dive into any specifics here. But recently, I think it was a couple months ago, this is the beauty of social media, right? You have to listen to opinions of people you haven't even seen in decades. Anybody else relate to that? I got people like I'm friends with that I haven't seen since like high school, and next thing you know, I'm listening to their political opinions, even though I don't care about their political opinions. I just want to see like a cute baby picture, see how their family's doing. I want to see that kind of stuff. But anyway, this person was caught up in one of the current political issues and literally posted like this rant. And essentially was saying like the people that see otherwise like don't deserve to live. Like it was like really like bordering on dark the way he saw things over this one particular issue. And it was really kind of disturbing to see this. And I think that's the type of person that almost needs like a fast from social media. I did this a couple of years ago, and I've been through stages where I was like totally like engrossed in what was going on politically. And a couple of years ago, I did for Lent, I gave up social media, and I tried to avoid like looking at certain news and stuff like that. I tried to basically like declutter my mind. And I can tell you since then, I'm not saying I never worry about this, but I kind of like detached myself a little bit in a healthy type of spiritual way. And I want to encourage you, be very careful what happens in your heart. Because these politicians, you may not like, it's okay not to like what certain people are doing, whether they're senators, presidents, whatever it may be. But I want to encourage you, if there's hatred in your heart toward any political leader, you need to check that. Because that does not come from God. That is not coming from God. A literal hatred toward. How many of y'all have ever been around people who literally like hate so-and-so, whatever it may be, whether it's a past president, whether it's the current president, whether it's the senator, whoever it may be, they literally develop a hatred in their heart. And this is a healthy biblical reminder. It's in 1 Timothy 2, verses 1. And this is a reminder for how we are to think of our political leaders in this country. And I'll be honest in saying I don't practice this as much as I need to. Listen to 1 Timothy 2, verse 1. It says, I urge then, first of all, that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live in peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. In other words, we need to be praying for these political leaders, even if you don't like what they're doing, even if you don't like the direction they're heading. I'm not saying you need to change your opinions at all, but I am saying you need to change your heart toward those people that maybe you don't like their worldview. And we all have that. We all deal with this. We all have political leaders. We don't really care for their views. We don't like their direction they want to lead the country or what direction they're pushing the country in. But this is a healthy reminder, saying simply telling us to pray for these people. Pray for these people. Because all they are is they're imperfect people like we are, doing a job to satisfy millions of people. And as you all know, when you're in that type of position, you can't satisfy everybody. And so we need to be, as Christians, prayerful and have that a non-hatred mindset toward the leaders in this country. Point number D I want to talk about is work. Work, that can be a stress producer. That can be an anxiety producer. That can be a worry producer in our lives, whether it's we're not advancing at our job the way we should, maybe we're not getting the pay we deserve, maybe we're not getting the raise we thought we deserved. These things can produce worry in our life if we're not careful. And which goes into point number 2 I had, is that worry is a waste of time. How many of y'all would agree that worry is a complete waste of time? Anybody else ever wasted time worrying? Wasted time worrying. I know I have in my life. How many of y'all ever heard of a man by the name of Connie Mack? Anybody ever heard? I've got one person. Don't feel bad if you hadn't. I hadn't heard of this person either. If you want to know who Connie Mack is, he lived from 1862 to 1956. And he was an American professional baseball catcher. Then he was a manager and then a team owner. He is the longest serving manager in Major League Baseball history. He holds the record for wins of a manager, 3,731 wins. What's interesting is he actually has more losses than wins. He has 3,948 losses. And he holds the record for games managed, which is 7,755 games managed, which is almost 1,000 more than any other manager in baseball history. Give you a little bit more rundown about him. Mac managed the Philadelphia Athletics for the club's first 50 seasons of play, starting in 1901, before retiring at age 87 following the 1950 season, and was at least part owner from 1901 to 1954. He was the first manager to win the World Series 3 times and is the only manager to win consecutive series on separate occasions. His five World Series titles remain the third most by any manager, and his 9 American League pennants rank second in league history. However, constant financial struggles forced repeated rebuilding of the roster, and Mac's teams also finished in last place 17 times. Mac was elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York in 1937. So here he was, a man who had more losses than wins over a 50-year career managing, but he won 5 World Series, but at the same time he also finished in complete last place 17 different times. He's a Hall of Fame guy, but as you can imagine, a guy who knew what it meant to be at the top, he knew what it meant to be at the bottom, and everywhere and anywhere in between. This man had a lot of worries and struggles throughout his career. And I want to listen to you this devotional that was written about him in bits and pieces. Listen to this. Connie Mack was one of the greatest managers in the history of baseball. One of the secrets of his success was that he knew how to lead and inspire men. He knew that people were individuals. Once when his team had clinched the pennant well before the season ended, he gave his 2 best pitchers the last 10 days off so that they could rest up for the World Series. One pitcher spent his 10 days off at the ballpark. The other went fishing. Both performed brilliantly in the World Series. Mac never criticized a player in front of anyone else. He learned to wait 24 hours before discussing mistakes with players. Otherwise, he said, he dealt with the goose too emotionally. In the first 3 years as a baseball league manager, Connie Mack's teams finished 6th, 7th, and 8th. He took the blame and demoted himself to the minor leagues to give himself time to learn how to handle men. When he came back to the major leagues again, he handled his players so successfully that he developed the best teams the world had ever known up to that time. Mack had another secret of good management. He didn't worry. Listen to what he says. I discovered that worry was threatening to wreck my career as a baseball manager. I saw how foolish it was, and I forced myself to get so busy preparing to win games that I had no time left to worry over the ones that were already lost. You can't grind grain with water that has already gone down the creek. And I thought that was a good lesson from someone who spent a lot of time at the top, a lot of time at the bottom, a lot of time anywhere and everywhere in between. He spent a lot of time worrying. And he said he discovered that worrying was threatening to wreck his career as a baseball manager. This echoes what Jesus says in Luke 12:25-26. It says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life, since you cannot do this very little thing? Why do you worry about the rest? And I want you to be thinking about in your life, what have you been worrying about? What have you been worrying about? Maybe in that place in your life where only you and God know about, that only you can see, a struggle or a burden you're carrying that has just been wearing you down. I want to encourage you to lay whatever it is down in God's hands today. We're going to go into a time of response here in a moment. And I want you to be thinking about, what is it that is causing you worry? I remember I was going through a time where I was just worried about a lot of things. I was angry, I was hurt. We talked about forgiveness the other week, and I was in a season where I wasn't forgiving others. I was worried a lot about a particular issue, and I think it was an Easter service, and they had a response time. And just quietly, as I was sitting there, I just prayed, and I just said, you know what, God, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being mad at these people. I got to let this go. I needed to let it go. I knew I needed to let it go. And at that particular point of the service, I literally had a moment of surrender, which is hard to do at times. surrendered. It doesn't mean I left that service today perfectly whole and made clean, if you will. But what it did is it began the process of me fully letting go. And now I'm at a point in my life where I've let that issue let it go so long ago that it's not even, you don't even think about it anymore. But it began that day in the service. It began that day to say, you know what, Lord, I need to quit carrying this. I need to quit carrying this past mistake. Maybe it's a past mistake. Maybe it's a season of life. Maybe it was a bad relationship. You can't go back and change things. You would like to do things differently, but you can't. And I want to encourage you to let go of something that may be weighing you down. Let's go into a time of prayer and response as to what God is doing in our life about this whole issue of worry that plagues us all at times. Heavenly Father, I want to lift up each person here today. And worry is something that you talk about, Lord, which means it's something we all relate to. And all of people throughout all of history have worried over things in life, things we can't control, things we can't go back and change, things we can't plan for in the future effectively, Lord. We can't guarantee certain things in the future, and it causes us to worry. Or maybe there's been people here who've been worried over finances. Things have been tight. They've been under the stress. And they're just struggling to trust you with their finances. Lord, I just pray for your peace over each person here this morning. That your peace would cover whatever issue of worry they're dealing with in their life. That they would know that you're completely sovereign over everything they're dealing with. That you have a plan. That you can see the future. That you know what's going to happen. That you're going to take care of that future. That you're going to bless them. That you're going to watch over them. Lord, I pray that these truths would take root in their hearts and their minds. That they would know that you tell them not to worry, but you also promise to provide for all of our needs no matter what we're facing in our lives. We thank you for all these things. In Christ's name, amen.